maybe struggling, or like a 19, 18, 20-year-old kid with their religion and then their life, basically. What's your advice? Because you've been there, you've done it, so.
Yeah. Um, Man, there's so much, and it would really be indicative of who I'm talking to,
Yeah.
their body language, what they're struggling with specifically.
Yep.
I think one of the big lessons when you're young, it's really easy to blame your parents for things that you're struggling with.
Yep.
And at a certain point as a man, as a person really, but certainly as you get into your early 20s, you literally can no longer use that excuse because they're no longer as involved with your decision-making process.
Yep.
So that's a huge part. The second thing that I would tell a lot of young men that it took me, man, if I had figured this out a little bit earlier, it probably would have been good. I'm going to get real nerdy for a second. As if I already have. Our prefrontal cortex in our brain doesn't finish growing until we're about 26 years old, which means that we don't actually, like when that happens, science would tell you that that's when we really start to wrestle with meaning as men.
Yep.
And until that point, it's all kind of nebulous, and we're chasing, colorful lights in the dark almost. And so what's really, really important about that, at least it played itself out in my life, was that it's really difficult at a young age to understand this, but the idea is if you don't understand your value, then you're going to incorrectly value what you do. And what that actually means is that you're gonna start performing. And this is a really deep concept, but for men specifically, we are creatures of accomplishment, right? So if men are science, females typically are art, right? So like we can tell you where we want to go, how we want to do it, yada, yada, yada. But you actually, as a female, tend to color the coloring book that we kind of playing the lines with, so to speak. And so what's difficult for high achieving athletes or men trying to break away, one, I would say you got to leave home to do it. That's even a biblical idea that you have to leave the nest to go get devoured by the world, so to speak, to become who it is you're supposed to become. So that's very, very important. If you just stay at home, it's really difficult to grow past what everybody has known you as. So that's one thing. But two, the idea of performing is difficult because when you perform, you are not your performance. And if you believe that you are your performance in anything, it's very easy to do in sports. It's very easy to say I'm as good as my batting average. I'm as good as how many home runs I've hit. I'm as good as how many strikeouts I've got as a pitcher. Definitely not as a hitter. I would have never struck out. But when you perform, it's actually this is directly correlated to music. When you perform, that's really just an expression of what you can do. It's not actually who you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the thing is, when you're young, especially as a man, you think you're only as valuable as your output. And that will fail 100 times out of 100 times. I don't care who you are. You cannot be perfect. And the reason you can't be perfect is nobody can define perfection, but you're going to try and define perfection and then live up to it. In my example of that, if somebody were to be like, well, what does that mean, Willie? Who do we glorify in sports? Mm-hmm. The people that are closest to perfection. Ted Williams, he was the greatest hitter of all time. He hit .416 with a batting average. It's the greatest thing. He is glorified as the greatest hitter to ever live. Perfection is 1,000. He came up 600 points short.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when you're saying I should be or I ought to be or I whatever, then you're already screwed, dude. And you're going to spend the back half of your 20s trying to unwind.
Yep.